Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verses 68 through 75. There are two kinds of holiness, true and false. True holiness in its essentials is the same from person to person. In matters not essential, there may be a wide difference, but in the essentials, there is agreement. True holiness, from person to person, from generation to generation, from culture to culture, has the same characteristics. True holiness is the work of the Holy Spirit. The person who is truly holy is made so by the Holy Spirit of God. Since true holiness has nothing in it of human merit or effort, it is marked by humility. A person living a holy life is humble. This humility is throughout a holy life. A holy person is unassuming, not claiming superiority over others. James Maurice Jumpin' Jim Gavin was a general in the United States Army during World War II. He was also referred to as the Jumping General because of his practice of taking part in combat drops with the paratroopers under his command. Gavin was the youngest U.S. general to command a division during World War II. His choice of uniform was the opposite of the flamboyant General Patton. Gavin wore the uniform of the enlisted soldiers and carried the rifle of the enlisted men under him. He said, "I have always believed that it is important for a general with the infantry to look just like the infantry." Legend has it that General Gavin would avoid standing on a platform looking down on his soldiers because he always assumed that there were better soldiers than he in the group. Another element of true holiness is an all-absorbing love for God and others. God is loved, adored, obeyed. Every person is loved as the image of God, no matter how sinful or fallen or warped a person may be. The one who is holy seeks to love, save, and elevate that person. True holiness comes through faith and trust in God. The person who lets go of God loses holiness and falls into sin. So holiness is marked by humility, love, and faith. What then are some of the marks of false holiness? In contrast to humility, there is an aristocratic, self-indulgent holiness. This aristocratic holiness may express itself in the trappings of religion, grand buildings, multiple activities and staff, and embracing of popular causes. It is always ready to adapt to the world and adopt a less offensive form. This sort of holiness is not persecuted by the world because it is harmless and the world understands it. In contrast to love, there is a coveting holiness. In coveting, a person reverses the direction of his or her life. Coveting seeks for the self to be loved, not to love God and others. Where love seeks to expend self for God and others, coveting seeks to expand self at the expense of God and others. In contrast to faith, there is a fanatical holiness. Fanatical holiness expresses itself in intense activity, even self-denial, and appears to be truly holy. Yet fanaticism is busy work. A fanatical person seeks to keep busy in order to prove to himself or to others that he is faithful. A fanatical person may even have a psychological or emotional need to punish herself in order to secure her own salvation. A fanatic is self-driven, not God-driven. We should seek true holiness marked by humility, love, and faith. We are made holy by God for God's purpose. Holiness belongs especially to the Lord. In Him it is pure, unmixed, and underived. God is called the Holy One. In like manner, Jesus Christ embodies the holiness of God. He is called the Holy One of God. In the synagogue, there was a man possessed by a demon, an impure spirit. He cried out at the top of his voice, "Go away! What do you want with me, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Luke chapter 4, verses 33 through 34. Just as we may separate holiness between true and false, we may also divide holiness between perfect and defective. God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is perfectly holy. But holiness in human beings is often defective. Given the nature of human beings, holiness sometimes is imperfect, or sometimes it may be lacking one thing. So in the Scriptures we find some qualifying terms applied to holiness when used in connection with human beings. Certainly we seek to allow God to work His holiness in us perfectly, but so often we fall short. We strive for perfection in holiness. Still, holiness in our lives is often defective, incomplete, imperfect, lacking. Perfect holiness seems so far away. Let us not stop the journey, but strive by the grace of God to see to it that we have true holiness. What will help us along the journey is an awareness of the defects in our own imperfect holiness. You and I may slide into defective holiness through misplaced commitments. Any holiness that replaces a commitment to God with another commitment is defective. For instance, we may replace a commitment to God with a commitment to a person, a leader, a preacher, a writer, a political candidate, or an evangelist. Now, I ran across this photograph, and it looked to me like a caricature of a TV evangelist. Actually, it's Wayne Cochran, a singer, sometimes called the White Knight of Soul. Many of us can remember the devotion that TV evangelists kindled several decades ago. Such devotion to a person, no matter how good their message is, can be seen in various genres, but it is misplaced if it replaces our commitment to God. We may replace our commitment to God with a commitment to a cause. And no matter how worthy or how biblically sound that cause may be, we make our holiness defective when we replace our commitment to God with a commitment to a cause. We may introduce a defect into our holiness when we replace our commitment to God with a commitment to an institution, including the church. There is a danger of replacing God with the church. I've seen it too many times in my role as a pastor, especially among clergy, who seek to preserve the familiar forms and structure of a congregation, a conference, an association, or a denomination. These institutions were created as a means by which we live out the purpose of God in our lives. They are not an end in themselves. No matter how worthy the institution, our commitment to it should not come before our commitment to God. These are the words of Him who holds the 7 stars in His right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know your deeds, your hard work, and your perseverance. I know that you cannot tolerate wicked people. that you have tested those who claim to be apostles, but are not, and have found them false. You have persevered and have endured hardships for my name, and have not grown weary. Yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love you had at first. Revelation chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Here's a church whose holiness has become defective. They worked hard. They stuck to their work. They did not tolerate evil. They exposed false doctrine. They were wrapped up so much in doing church that they forgot their first love, God. Matthew records Jesus' words, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves." Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. Matthew continues with Jesus' teaching, "By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them." Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 through 20. And then finally, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Put away false holiness. Put away defective holiness. Seek true holiness. Seek God's grace that will perfect you in holiness. Love of the world will lead to false and defective holiness. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. 1 John 2, verse 15. Don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. James chapter 4, verse 4. So far I have contrasted true and false holiness and perfect and defective holiness. Let me add a third contrast: constant and occasional holiness. Let me describe two paths of holiness. Here is the goal of holiness represented by the cross. Here are two persons who are on two separate paths to holiness. The path of A goes rapidly back and forth, close to holiness and then far away several times. The path of B goes slowly toward holiness. A and B both end up at the same distance from the goal. Now, which person, A or B, is living a holy life? The answer could be either both or B. Which person, A or B, is progressing toward holiness? The answer is B. Which person, A or B, has a constant holiness? The answer is B. We seek to be constant in the journey toward holiness. Notice that neither person has arrived, A or B, but person B is making progress. That person is constant. Live a holy life. Seek holiness that is true, perfect, and constant, not false, defective, and occasional. Be holy before the Lord. Holiness is an attribute of God. It is an essential attribute. God seeks to give you and me lives that are holy. Holiness, true, perfect, and constant, is what we lack. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed us, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies, and to enable us to serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. Luke 1, 68 through 75. Paul writes, "You were taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 through 24. Let us then walk in holiness before God, receiving from Him, by His grace, a holiness that is true, perfect, and constant.